it's so good to see you and to talk to you again.
Oh, it's great. I'm so excited.
If you haven't listened to episode 68 of our Story and Rain Talks podcast featuring Ellen Mirojnick, you must. We discussed, Ellen, how you got your start, of course, and we discussed all of your iconic work on the films and series so many of us count as favorites. Bridgerton, Wall Street, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, Unfaithful, Perfect Murder, and so many more. We're going to talk about one of your most recent projects, taking the world by storm, Bridgerton. But first, on the podcast, you said that you particularly enjoy designing for contemporary stories because you get to create a piece of history. And one can go back and say, oh, that's what it was like. That's what we looked at the time. So I feel like you're the perfect person to discuss style and fashion across the decades with. When you
oh my gosh,
you really are.
That's a big topic. Let's see how we can do it.
Recent decades.
Okay.
Right? When you think about the looks that you created for your 80s films, what was the look? Like, what comes to mind?
I kind of think that the look that I created for the 80s, with the exception of very specific pieces, for example, in Fatal Attraction, Glenn Close's black leather coat,
right,
in maybe a couple of pieces for Anne Archer, I think that they were basically classic. I really think that I've looked at a number of the films again recently, and actually also stills, and I really feel so, I don't know, I just feel so committed to the fact that they feel like the time, because of the time and place of the story and what's around, etc. I mean, what surrounds the costumes, but they are somewhat timeless and classic to a degree. The silhouettes are clean. The emphasis on the 80s, as I said, Glenn Close with her leather coat and her shoulders. Clearly, it's the shoulders, right. And in the 80s, even the late 80s. But I look at the 90s, and I look at A Perfect Murder, and those clothes, I really look at them and say, who did those clothes? Those are really
I love that you love the clothing in that film too, because it's so true. And we talk about this on the podcast. You watch A Perfect Murder, and anyone who has not seen A Perfect Murder, A, it's a great film, and B, what we're talking about is the timelessness of Ellen's costumes, but just how great they are. You want to wear every single one of those outfits.
I agree.
Right?
I really agree. And I think that the men's clothes, clearly they are classy and they are dressy, all things considered today. And also, all things put aside streetwear influence and new silhouettes that are really very prevalent today. But if you talk about classic menswear, that's classic. It's absolutely classic. In terms of Michael Douglas's his costumes, but Gwyneth's are just. I still get questions of where can I get that brown shearling coat.
You do.
Yeah, I mean that's like 1996.
Yes.
I think. But it's quite. I think that it's quite. I think that when you find characters like that and you find costumes of the time like that, it actually creates a history onto itself. Of course, you still are able to go back and look at that history and say, oh, that was what the 90s were about. That was what the late 80s were about. You feel the time and the place, and all of the costumes are designed accordingly. I think that it is my particular point of view about silhouette and classic style that plays into it. And also, we're also dealing with people in New York.
Yes.
And in New York that are of an upscale nature. So it's very, very specific and very and very much of the time and the place and the story of the film.
And how did things change in the 2000s? Was there a big shift in fashion once we got to that decade? Or does it just seem so? Because that's been our last 20 years.
I can't believe it's 20 years when you say
Right?
2000. But nonetheless, it is 20 years. I think that the films that I did in the early 2000s, I think actually were a continuation of the 90s. You know, the thing about fashion and decades is that what happens is that you have a 10-year span. You have a 10-year span of a decade. And in that, when you come upon the beginning of a decade, you know, we all thought, oh, 2000, things are going to change. Oh, 1990, things are going to change.
Right.
They don't. Things don't shift basically until it is in the realm, it's in the area of the mid-decade that
Right.
things begin to come in. And so that it doesn't really start at the beginning of the 2000s or the beginning of the decade. It starts mid. And when it's mid, then you feel the influences coming upon fashion and how silhouettes change.
Yes, it is. That's a very good point. On the podcast, I talk about how you gave some of our most favorite film characters really iconic style. We're talking a little bit about that now. How did you do that? What's your formula? I think about how someone might be able to use your techniques to develop their own personal style. Is it a repeat of a color palette? Is it a silhouette? What makes for standout signature style, do you think?
Well, there's two different topics that you're talking about. You're talking about an iconic look, and then you're talking about a personal style.
Mm-hmm.
When you create an iconic look, or it becomes an iconic look in film or television, whichever platform you happen to be seeing something on, it actually hits a zeitgeist. I always think it becomes an emotional point in your heart that strikes a chord that you go, oh, that's really, it means something to me on some level, and whatever that might be. And that it becomes something that's recognizable, that, representative of what a particular zeitgeist, the feeling of the group, the collective, is after. When it comes to personal style, I personally love to design whereby you understand the silhouette that you are looking at, that you're understanding. The silhouette to me on a body is really important. How the silhouette moves around the body, how it's not, it doesn't matter if it's tight or loose or grabbed at a certain point or emphasizing different parts of the body. It's really how it graces the body that's most important to me. A palette, I mean, my personal style is black,
Yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily indicate I'm either black or white. I love color. I am a walking contradiction continually. I am rebellious and I'm a contradiction at the same time. But personally, I stay in the simple reign. Every now and then when I go to the very fancy and dressy and kind of frivolous way, it's fine for a moment. It's not fine for my style.
Yeah,
But that being
right.
said, it's fine for others. It's really
Right.
fine for others. I think that the one thing that somebody really needs to do in terms of their personal style is, frankly, you have to really look at yourself. You have to look at yourself and understand yourself, what you see in that mirror, not what others see or what you see in others. You might be influenced by others and you might be influenced by what you see, but take that to heart. Understand that. Know what you're turned on by. Cool. It's like cool, cool, cool. But how can I wear it?
Right.
How can I interpret it? The idea of free expression and really, really some freshness, I think is really, we're at that point now. We're
Yeah.
at an inflection period that we're about to we can change the world. So if you look at yourself and you look and see what your attributes are, or what styles you like what colors you like, pat all of it all together. There's not one simple formula, and never think that there's one simple formula, in my opinion. I think that you should look at yourself. I think that you should understand if you need foundation, you don't need foundation. Things always look great when there is a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But what type of shapes do you like? What type of colors do you like? What kind of combinations? Do you like to be wild? Do you like to be frivolous? Do you like to be simple? And then take from the trends what you're really attracted to. But it's really up to you.
Right. That's great advice, though. For those of you that are asking about Ellen's work on Cinderella, we're going to get to that in a second. We have a question about that from a follower. But first, on to Bridgerton. We're doing the style of Bridgerton this week on storyandreign.com because
what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
We're going to talk a little bit about what you're going to talk about to us today. We're going to put that into a story, and then we're going to talk about some of the things you and I spoke about on the podcast, which we're going to talk about here. But I think it's just perfect for spring. Like when I think of the look of Bridgerton, I think of spring dressing. But first, we have a question from Billy about how many people were direct reports to you on Bridgerton and in how many different roles. I feel like I read that the entire costume department was over 200 people, right?
Well, we have to separate this. I mean, I don't want to, numbers are numbers, but, I think that I really would love to have the audience understand what the numbers mean. Okay. Yes. So there were a lot, 283 people all together. And when I say all together, that I really do mean that. So there's the costume department, and in the costume department, there's the designer, the assistant designers, the shoppers, the artisans, the jewelers, the dyer and distressers. Most importantly, I shouldn't say that, not most importantly, but importantly, there are the cutters, the drapers, the embroiderers, the embellishers, and the fitters. I don't think I'm leaving it, and the illustrators. Okay?
Right.
In the wardrobe department, are the people that we cannot live without, and they are the wardrobe masters that take care of the costumes on the actors, on the set, and every day, so that we can shoot. We don't interfere with that. We go and establish costumes. We go and make sure everything is correct, or if we have to do something at the spur of the moment, etc. But it's those people that are so equally important to the design of the film, as far and in terms of making sure the actors are all the way they are in the respective costumes, that they're all the way they should be, etc., and that the costumes are holding up and working.
Do you have to provide a lot of notes to those people? Is there a brief that you give them to sort of?
No, this is all talk. This is all communication. Yeah. Communication is the most valuable, the most important, and the single ingredient to success. And that is communicating. And we go through every single last detail with the wardrobe master and the principal costumers. And it's their responsibility to make sure that it feeds down to whoever our dailies, or people who come to work on a daily basis. And otherwise there are, and there's a bunch of people that come on a daily basis. As soon as you have more than the principals playing, and you have background players and so on and so forth, and bit players, and it grows exponentially, you have dailies that come and do the work as needed.
Mm-hmm. The direction on the podcast, we discussed that how there's always an aspirational aspect to Shondaland Productions. But what do you recall from your first conversations about the project?
Can we do it? Can we do it? Is it possible? Is it possible for this project to happen? What do we need to know? What's available? How much is it going to cost, etc.? It's the practicality. It's the nuts
Logistics.
and bolts of it.
Yeah.
It's the logistics, the nuts and bolts of it. To all of which I said, yes, it's possible. There's nothing available. It will cost. And I'd worked with Shondaland before. So
Yeah.
I knew the idea of what Shondaland is always asking for in their presentation, and it should always be of an aspirational, inclusive manner. And with that, I knew I didn't have to say, what does that mean? I
Right.
knew what that meant.
Right.
And what they always love to do is be able to do something that will reach a modern audience. So they will not tell you how to design something or what exactly they're looking for, but they will tell you that that is very, very important to the point of view of the whole show. I read Chris Van Duzen's pilot, who is the showrunner and creator of Bridgerton, and it was spectacular. There was so much in it. I really, honest to goodness, did not know how you could really do this and pull it off effectively on a short schedule, because
Right.
there was so much to do. That was only one episode.
Wow.
That's the first
Wow.
episode, Diamond in the Water. But everybody was so excited about it. And what was most important, aside from the aspirational aspect of it, was that it was a show that was to be, it was not to be a history lesson. It was to be,
Right.
it was to be an adaptation of what we felt the Regency period of 1813 in London, and the social season, springtime, social season, marriage market, the ton, be like. And that's how we went about creating it.
How are you describing the look in a few words these days?
Oh, maybe you can help me.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about how it's romantic. Right?
I think I think Bridgerton is romantic. It's alluring. I think that it's romantic, alluring, and sexy. I really do. When I say sexy, I do mean sexy. I think that there's a romance to the allure. There's an allure to there's an allure to the romance that happens to be really kind of sexy.
Yeah. It's sexy at the same time. What were the symbolic wardrobe moments that you had to design for? Would you say, was that between the two families, the difference between the look of the two families?
Yes, I would say most definitely. The two families were very different, and the introduction of both of the families was a very important aspect in the presentation of the show. Both families were written very differently. And the Featherington family was always, even in Julia Quinn's books, were always written as being bold, and I use the word audacious because I think it is quite audacious. I love them. I think they're audacious. I think they're very Versace-esque, although that wasn't written. But we compared that in a way and used that imagery to understand the degree of contrast there would be with the Bridgertons, so
Yes.
there was that. And tell me, what did you ask me before that?
Symbolic moments that you had to design for, that you had to account for.
Well, I think that in creating both families and creating what the world looked like, I mean, here is a show. I was very, very, very fortunate. Very fortunate. It was a blessing. I was given an assignment that one does not get every day of their career. And what was sensational about it was understanding the brief and understanding what we had to hit gave me latitude to create a world
A world, really.
And it's creating a world as opposed to creating costumes
Right.
are two different things.
Yeah.
In the creation of this world and what the audience was going to embrace and be invited to a feast to see, needed to have everything, so that it wasn't just costumes in a room or costumes at a ball or costumes at an event. It all had to flow beautifully from one scene to another, one character to another. And so we were tasked with, how do you shift that idea of that period to a modern audience? And I really do believe, I don't know if we discussed this, I don't remember now, but I really do believe that the beauty of the show and how Chris and the editors and everybody worked to complete, they created a choreography of fluidity.
Yes.
There is a fluidity. It moves from one scene to another to
Yeah,
another.
it's
And I will say this really, I mean, I stand by no matter what,
okay.
is that the lines get blurred, and there is this, maybe this is a better way to describe it, this romantic illusion that you are hypnotized by. And that is really how, that to me, after
Right. It's
all
an
these months,
entire
is
mood
really.
and vibe and
Mhm,
moment,
mhm.
and a lot of that was the color palette too.
Yes,
On the podcast, we talk about how the color palette will just make you happy. And you were quoted, I believe it was in Women's Wear Daily, saying the colors are like an ice cream sundae with all the toppings. I love that. The color palette is so important and so strong. Did color come to you first? I don't remember if we
yes,
talked. It came.
yes, yes. I am like kind of, I mean, as I said before, I'm a walking contradiction, but I am ruled by color. Color is the thing that I am so attracted to and obsessed with
Me too.
continually. And, although we learned much later on, I mean, to the audience's recollections, most films that take place in this period of time that we've seen, I will say now, with the exception of Emma, but the color palette is basically quiet, British, subdued,
Yes.
beige, brown, green, what have you. But the color palette that really did exist at this period of time was far more vibrant than anybody was. I learned this later as well.
See, that's
It was
very interesting.
far more vibrant than anyone was ever really aware of, just generally speaking. But what we did, I was really informed by the palette and really just so happy to look at all of Janice Vigus's paintings that were just vibrant and gorgeous and colorful. And her subject matter was so similar to what we were doing that she was the one that I was able to see. If you take these colors and you blur the lines, boy, you get an amazing effect.
An
And that was
explosion.
the one piece that informed me first. And we then, it kind of leapt off the page to just be, wow, this is the way to go. And we subsequently changed the entire palette
Wow.
continually and changed everything and made it vibrant and luscious. And you wanted to live in that story. And I think that was part, we didn't necessarily set out, you set out to do a great job, but you don't necessarily know how it's going to be received. And I thought that we could potentially be raked over the coals because it was not so accurate. I mean, not accurate as we've seen period dramas before, but there was quite a lot of accuracy in there, and we chose our times to shift.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It was like the perfect ratio of accuracy and fun and reinterpretation. It's like you hit the perfect balance.
I think that that's what we strove for continually. And when we just looked at a dress, for example, we just go, oh, okay, I don't know. But when we first came upon the solution to how to shift it, it really became just such a delight because we were able to layer fabrics upon fabrics and sheers and translucent fabrics on transparent fabrics to create dimension and color and fluidity to all that we looked at. And that was it was a huge gift that we truly stumbled upon.
Yes. Let's talk about yellow.
Okay.
We talked about that on the podcast. You said that because of Bridgerton, yellow emerges as a color people are really interested in. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, yellow was a color that people were interested in because there was this massive amount of Googling for yellow dresses.
So
funny enough, after the show premiered, and I thought to myself, that is just crazy. I mean, the things that were Googled, whether it be yellow or needlepoint or Regency dresses, or now then they called Regency core, etc., were nutty. You know, it was just really, really nutty. But yellow was a color for Penelope, and it was from the books. It was written from the books to the adaptation of the screenplay, and it was not only yellow; it was acidic yellow, to be clear, and it was to really, really point out the differences in the characters. To be honest, that is why. But yellow is a very powerful color, and it is I think that yellow, as the sun, it is a courageous, really strong, firm color that is bold, audacious, but in its courageousness. That's how I feel about yellow, and I think it served her life affirming, and it really identified Penelope when you first see her, and throughout the course of the show, although she wears some other colors. I think yellow is her trademark.
How often do directors talk to you about or review the color that you're using? You've said that Adrian Lyne has a color sensibility that he needs when in the projects that you've worked with Adrian. Is it always that color is reviewed, or is it dependent upon the project?
It's so dependent upon the project, and it's so dependent upon the director. So dependent on the director. The director is, at the top of the pyramid, if you will, and there will always be a point of view. Now, there are some directors that really are very, very concerned solely with the drama and trust you implicitly to create the character design and the story. When we do character design, it really is storytelling through these characters. So does that represent what it is that the director wants to put forth? Adrian was a director that I worked with that was always concerned about color. However, his color was well suited to my personal color, not necessarily black and white, but in neutrals and monotone neutrals. So what I learned to do with that kind of color palette was wonderful, because you learn to see the variance, the subtleties, the amount of mix in monotones that is just absolutely inspired, and the depth that you can get when layering or characters are next to each other, and what they do to the face is really, really kind of thrilling to work with.
And how did you use print and pattern and texture on Bridgerton for Bridgerton?
All over the place.
I mean, it's all
over the place.
It's mixed. It's a mixed assortment, really.
It's a whole mix. I think that clearly the Bridgertons and the Featheringtons are very different in their approach to style and color palette and embellishment and absolutely the biggest feast you could imagine, right? And then we have the subtleties of the Bridgertons, and that was so classic and elegant and pretty, and almost like the colored filigreed ceilings of that time. It was beautiful. But to take both of those ends, how you make the show become that magical kind of the magical um, world that you wanted to be part of is by taking those two palettes and then mixing it within the content of the content of the rest of the show. On other characters, never the same, but in having patterns and overlays and transparencies, with pattern, without pattern, but color separations and color mergings of colors and creations of colors and new fabrications with layering. You get a mix that is, it's like when you're cooking, it is,
Right.
Are you going to follow the recipe, or are you going to make it up as you go along?
Right.
We made it up as we went along.
We talked about key items and elements. We talked about the importance of embellishments, and you talked about this really interesting way of how you use tulle. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, what we learned at the very, very beginning in trying to actually shift our foundation to a modern point of view is that I took a silhouette plain. It was magenta silk, but it was a beautiful, accurate Empire gown, and said, what am I going to do with this? This isn't the world that we're living in. And there was some tulle in a barrel next to me, and there were about 4 or 5 colors, and I just started to drape it over and over and over this garment and wrapped it up with a ribbon and then moved a flower onto it and so on. And what I learned so quickly, and we all saw, it was a magical moment. What we all saw in that moment were these layers of colors, that tulle being light as a feather, but these layers of color on top of a strong color could create that, I don't know, it was Tamara, it was magic. It was that moment that really, really changed everything.
And how far into this was it that this moment?
I would say it was a good, could have been 2.5, 2 3/4 months in. You couldn't drape it, you couldn't draw it, you couldn't. Right. No, this was something that was so organic and so much of feel and touch and the whole thing with others around and just go. And it was just magical. It was magical. But how we get there is by also doing so much research at the very, very beginning. And we were real fortunate at that time as well, because the Dior show was on at the V&A, and we just spent days upon days upon days going back and back and back and viewing this show that was so spectacular. And it was Dior from the beginning of time through all of the designers and all of what he did. And I am certain that every time we went back, there was another piece that was subconsciously embedded in each and every one of my teams and my brain. I'm certain of it. It was brilliant.
Yes. One of the other items that we talk about on the podcast was sheer gloves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the sheer gloves are fabulous.
I think they're fabulous too. And I started looking for sheer gloves online.
And you couldn't find them.
Well, I found a few. We'll see if they're Ellen approved. I want to show you what I found.
Okay.
But when we say sheer, what are those materials and fabrics? And what are the other important accessories of Bridgerton? Would it be the hair adornments?
Hair
gloves.
adornments, hair adornments, flowers, sheer gloves. I would say those are the three, and I would also include some jewelry. And I would say jewelry with a touch of sparkle. And it doesn't have to be a lot of sparkle, not as much as that we saw on the Featheringtons, for example, or any of the others at the ball. But I would say there's a bit of sparkle. It lights up the face. I mean, I can't resist sparkle, but it lights up the face. So whether you put it in your ears or around your neck or on your head, wherever, on your clothing, I love it. But sheer gloves are hugely important. Hugely important. The fabrications are not really fabulous fabrications.
They're just, what is it, like organza?
Nylon. No, it's not even organza. It's like nylon.
Right.
It's like ordinary nylon, like from the 50s nylon.
Right. We were saying that, every costume was really built from scratch. We talk about that on the podcast, but in contrast, and we also talked about on the podcast, in contrast to this, in your work, when designers and brands approach you about getting into a film that you're working on.
Yeah.
But I have a question about, you touched on the jewelry. The jewelry of Bridgerton kind of does have a modern touch. Were there any contemporary brands and resources you were able to use in the styling, or did you make all that jewelry?
It was half and half. We made quite a bit of jewelry, and we actually rented quite a bit of jewelry. There are Italian houses that have collections of jewelry in every decade, every time period, and so on. We were able to rent some jewelry, and Lorenzo made jewelry at the same time, principal jewelry that was exquisite. And the balance of the jewelry that we found was clearly contemporary.
Yeah.
But we would mix it.
That.
But we would mix it.
I love the way that looked.
And it is the contemporary, you see those touches of that contemporary,
yes.
Clearly I'm not going to put a piece on that is an abstract shape. Do you know what I mean?
Right, like it's not an artful piece of jewelry. Right,
yeah, no. But mixing that with flowers and never having enough flowers and that type of adornment and gloves with, just think of it with a simple shift dress. How pretty would that look? I mean, I don't mean in Bridgerton world, but in modern world.
Well, that's my next question for you. Yes. We do talk about this on the podcast, how to get the look. This spring and summer, how can someone modernize the look that you designed for Bridgerton for day to day? But as you just said, you said a shift dress and some flowers in the hair?
Flowers in the hair. I don't necessarily think just a shift dress, but a really pretty, I love pretty dresses. I love pretty feminine dresses. I would love to see feminine dresses for spring. I'd love to see an open neckline. I'd love to see an open neckline with little sheer gloves and a little sparkle. And even if you don't wear jewelry or what have you, there's ribbons that you can tie around. There's ribbons that you can use in your hair. There's ribbons that you can add flowers to or a bit of sparkle to and make things for around your neck or around your wrist with a sheer glove, around some part of the dress or top that you might find. I think how to get the look is be as light as you can be. Okay, light, I don't mean in color. I mean in fabrication, even if it's tons of ruffles. Still have it be light, airy. Thank you. I would have it airy. I would decorate it with ribbons. I decorate it with a sheer glove. I decorate flowers in the hair or around a neckline. Around, sparkles around. There's always the shoulder that can take lots of flowers. And ribbons. Don't forget ribbons.
There was a lot of ribbon. Yes. I love the ribbon too. Carlo.
And I will say,
yes.
If you can find a great petticoat, do that.
like a petticoat,
a full
full,
petticoat,
like one of those chiffon, right? To
a
just
full thing.
give it a
Who
little
knows
lift.
what it could give it a little lift, give it a
Yeah.
little lightness, pretend you're floating on air.
You know, we also talked about is the nightgown or the night dress making a
Yes.
comeback? And I think big time, big time,
Uh-huh.
big time, big time, right?
Yes. But you know what I'm very surprised about with the nightgown is that I know that India interpreted it as the house dress,
Right,
calling it the house dress.
right.
And it's not the house dress,
No,
but I understand why India called it the house dress, because people don't go out. And we change in Bridgerton, they change their clothes so often. And
so often.
during the day, they wear a dress, of course, and it is a day dress
Yes,
compared to the night dress that they wear to sleep, or the evening dress that they wear to a ball, or a dinner dress that they wear to dinner.
yes. Back to this question from Carlo. You touched on this a little bit. How long were you working on Bridgerton before it began shooting?
5 months. 5 months.
And a question from Jane. Which of your past work do you love most from a fashion perspective?
Oh, no.
So many projects, so many films, so
That's
many
a
series.
hard question to answer. I think from a fashion point of view, well, I love Perfect Murder. I really do love Perfect Murder.
Me
I
too.
think it's spectacular from
It
a
really
fashion point of view. It has everything. But of course, Wall Street is iconic. Basic Instinct is iconic.
You know which film we didn't get a chance to talk about that I love for the fashion is Intersection.
Gosh, me, Tamara,
I
you are
told you.
spectacular.
I know. I mean, and you watched that film because of the fashion. Like I remember, speaking of ribbon, didn't you put a ribbon on Sharon Stone's head as a headband in that film? It was
I think so.
You
I
did.
think so.
And then there was like some great sweater.
The sweaters were spectacular.
They were. Do you remember where they were from?
No, I have absolutely. I know that I gave Lolita a sweater.
That sweater was fabulous.
That multicolored sweater that I wish I had today, but it was mine, and I gave it to her. But look at what it did to her hair and everything. It was perfect.
It was, and I remember wanting that sweater when I saw it. Where did this sweater come from?
I don't remember. It probably came from one of those shops that only did sweaters that were one or two of a kind, probably.
Yes, they were beautiful. Where were we? Actually, I have a question. Your daughter's an actor.
Yes.
Which of your films are her favorites from a perspective of your work?
I think that she doesn't comment on Bridgerton yet, but I think The Greatest Showman. Because I said to her the other day, I said, I don't know. I think I would do some things differently if I did The Greatest Showman today. And she said, oh, it was perfect. Are you crazy? So
it makes me want to rewatch it.
I don't know. I know that she loved all of what we've spoken of. The Perfect Murder, she loved. She absolutely loved it. That.
Can't get enough of it. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to check out the costumes.
The costumes they hold up really well. I feel
they hold up really well. They're classic, but there's so much style to them as well. They're not classic. There's so much style there. Mm-hmm. I love this question from Lorraine. What do you look for in an assistant, and how many assistants do you work with?
It depends on the project. It depends on the size of the project. The assistant is a very, very important role. And what I look for in an assistant is the combination of skills, which go from managerial, organizational, no drama at all. I can
only imagine what happens when
it rears its ugly head.
Yes.
Being a team player, really understanding and communicating with every single person, have an amazing aesthetic, being supportive, knowing what it is that we're working on. And what I mean by that is, what is it that we're working on? Are we working on what kind of show we're working on? Knowing how it is that it comes together, knowing what it is to talk to the people on the floor, knowing what it is that the AD does, knowing what it is that
really
that
knowing.
every department does,
Right.
and knowing how to make a project come
You
to
can't
life.
underestimate that.
No, it's the most important thing that but it's the combination
you need to know what
of
you're involved in, right?
yeah,
You need to
and
know what you're
yes, and being able to work with the supervisor, or however the structure is, whatever country or place we're in, and understanding about the support system. It's very important to me. It's as important as an aesthetic sensibility. There might be an assistant that has all of those qualities that I've just said. However, maybe their aesthetics are not as fabulous as somebody else's. Well, maybe then I still hired the aesthetic with all of those organizational skills and managerial skills and understanding of what we're making, and then I hire another assistant to work the aesthetics. But it's great to have it in one person.
That's great information and advice. From Vivian, we finally get to our question. What details can you share about the costumes you designed for Camila Cabello in the upcoming Cinderella film? That also stars like Billy Porter and Idina Menzel. I bet there was a lot of costume talk with Billy, I would imagine. No? Okay. Can you tell us anything about these costumes? You can't.
I'm sorry.
I tried.
You know what it is? It's a great tale. It is a Cinderella. What I could tell you is this. It is a fabulous, really fun interpretation of the Cinderella tale. It takes place in fairy tale time. So it does that. Fairy tale time means that there's no particular time period, but it's not right now. It's not a contemporary movie. It is a musical. There's great dancing. There's great music. Camila is sensational. She is really, it's a great retelling of the Cinderella story, but with a 21st century point of view of where she's going and what her hopes, wishes, and dreams are. But it's full 21st century, but it takes place in a fairy tale.
That's interesting. Well, we can't wait to see those costumes. Ellen, you also told me you're currently collaborating with Steven Soderbergh again.
Yes.
And speaking of Steven, another film we didn't get a chance to talk about on the podcast is Let Them All Talk, which was filmed entirely on the ship the Queen Mary 2. And coincidentally, I myself did wardrobe on a series that took place on a cruise ship. Far from this type of a project, but it was interesting. It was an interesting experience. How did you and your team handle costuming that film? Like, such great costumes on that film, on Meryl Streep, on Candice Bergen, on Diane Weiss. That couldn't have been easy, though. It must have been great working with those women.
Well, it was absolutely sensational. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Those women are everyone, inclusive of Lucas Hedges and Gemma Khan. They're just amazing people. Yeah, they're just fabulous, and everybody was up for it. Okay, so this was the point of view. We are going on a cruise, not a cruise. We're going on a crossing. Pardon me. We're going on a crossing, and we're going to wind up in England, and we're going to Wales, and Meryl's character is going to accept an award, and she's inviting two of her old college friends along. Each character was to pack their bag as if they were really going on a crossing. And what we did, Meryl had a very specific point of view that she wanted to hopefully achieve. And we did that. I'd worked with Merrill before, so I knew what I had to prepare for and what I had to get, which we did. And we packed a bag accordingly from all the pieces that I accumulated and she had. Candy's character was a little bit different. She was a little bit wilder.
I
And
loved her. Her costumes are
they
fantastic.
were hysterical.
You know,
They
Western shirts.
and the hat, and her green glasses and the Gucci sweater. It was really a combination of both of ours as well. Diane actually packed her bag. And so, but we looked at it. I mean, I did all the fittings, I did all of the curating and so on and so forth. I brought clothes on to Meryl. I mean, for Meryl's character and for Candy's character. Diane was complete. Gemma was a little bit of a combination. Lucas was all his, and it was all curated. And I mean, I designed it, yes, but it was curated from all of these pieces. We packed the bag, put it in their rooms, and it was the hardest film I have ever done.
I was going to say
it was hard because it was just myself and two other people. We did everything, but you know, the size of this ship is like 4 foot.
So Ellen, you were there. I was wondering if you were there.
Yeah, I was there every minute of the day.
Yeah, right.
It was crazy. We worked from morning till night. The ship was absolutely sensational. Everybody was so terrific. We had an extras casting person aboard, and she would find the extras who wanted to be part of it. We did not own the ship totally, just outright. Right. It was the most exceptional experience ever. There were only 20 people on the crew altogether. I mean, on our crew.
That's close-knit.
20, including the actors. This was like
bare bones.
Bare bones. We made the film in 13 days, and it was a complete film. I mean, Stephen is totally remarkable on every level.
I remember seeing Candice Bergen's Instagram post at the time while you were shooting, and I was getting such a kick out of them.
She is a hoot. She is one of the funniest people I've ever met. She is just a doll and a hoot. They all are. And the one thing to know about that movie is not only did we pack our bags and go and made a movie in 13 days altogether, inclusive of England, but there was no script.
Yes.
There was only a story and no script to go by.
I mean,
and those so women, it was improv the entire film.
You really can't tell. I mean, you kind of can't tell. Sometimes
no,
there
was an outline of a story, but it was totally improv.
Incredible. What did you have? A couple of staterooms just for wardrobe prep? I mean, you must have had to take over stateroom. No, you just you did it as if they were travelers. Wow. What an experience.
It was great. It was absolutely great.
Okay. Well, to wrap up, I just wanted to ask you about your upcoming project. You're working with Stephen right now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about that at all?
Well, it is going to be a thrilling story, like a thrilling story. And it takes place now and it stars Zoe Kravitz.
Perfect.
I'm sorry, that's all I could tell you.
No, I know. I'm envisioning these costumes for Zoe. It must be great. Anyway, Ellen, thank you so much for the chat. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure. This is just such a great talking to you is just a dream.
Oh, thank you so much. I thank you so much.